This is Pat Iyer, and welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast. I have brought with me today a man who is in Reading, England, and is an expert in the area of sales and service. Steve Catchick and I have known each other from being part of a group that focuses on creating videos for marketing purposes. And as I learned more about Steve's background, I thought it would be perfect for him to come and talk with you about aspects of sales and service and dealing with difficult people. Steve, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Pat, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know as you and I talked about what we could share with our legal nurse consultants, we discussed that you can sell a service to an attorney, but there is a difference between sales and service. So let's focus, first of all, on that difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was taught a long time ago that the word sales was derived from a Scandinavian word, to serve. And I still think it's, and another mentor I've been to says, don't think about selling, think about allowing people to buy, which is a different angle on it. I think that there's a distinction between the two, but actually by serving, you should always be serving first. And I believe everybody in an organization, their first role is to serve. Their second role is to understand that everyone is also in sales. And the third is to be prepared to step up and do whatever is right for the customer. And finally, the fourth is whatever their job role definition is. It's really a combination of four parts. But I think sales is effectively, if you serve well, that's what we should be doing. The old days of selling, or what I used to call flog it and leg it, are gone mostly. It's relationships and it's about serving and focusing on the customer today.
Now, you just used an expression that I haven't heard before, flog it and leg it.
Yeah.
Tell me what that means.
Well, actually, I used that from a long time ago. I was working at a company as an engineer, and one of the salesmen's name was called Leggett. And flog it is to sell. It's like selling from the market. Just sell at any pace, anything, whatever. We used to call him Flog It and Leg It because he used to sell anything regardless of, sometimes it appeared, of whether it was the right thing for the customer. He got his commission, and I may be being harsh on him, but we used to call him Flog It and Leg It. And yeah, that's an expression I still use. It brings a smile to my face anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in our world, that may be an attorney who approaches a legal nurse consultant and says, can you do this or can you do that? And we've been trained to say yes to everything and then say, all right, then let me figure out how I can do it. But there could be situations where the legal nurse consultant would say, oh, yes, of course I can do that. And that would not be the right response.
Yes, it's interesting because, again, as an entrepreneur and being a lot in the personal development, I was told a long time ago that if you're selling something from the stage and people are interested in something, you sell it even before you've created it. Because if there's enough interest, you'll create it. If there isn't, you won't. But that does presuppose that you have the ability to do just that. You have the ability to create that product or service. So when you don't have that ability, you're just flogging anything, then I think that's when I call it the flog it and leg it mode.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there's a distinction really.
It is, and it brings up questions of honesty and integrity.
Yes.
There are times that you can find a subcontractor who will be able to provide exactly that type of case review.
Yeah.
But there are times that, particularly for inexperienced people who are approached with something and they have no idea what the attorney is asking for, but they're agreeing because they're hungry for the work. I think that's the distinction that I want to make.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly it.
I know that when we were preparing for this, we talked about your company being the Secret Salesforce. I have that right. Being the founder of the Secret Salesforce program. What does that mean within the context of what we're talking about?
Okay, first of all, I ought to say my company is actually called Performance Counts, and the Secret Salesforce is a concept I came up with a few years ago which is now the program and the speech I do. The concept of it is about the fact that initially it was targeted at organisations, although I believe it can apply equally nowadays to solopreneurs and small businesses. But the principle is that there is always a hidden resource that are untapped. And those resources, if they are not empowered and not engaged and not motivated, will never give more than just good, if that. And by having the right engagement, the right motivation, the right empowerment, because people like autonomy to do their own job, they are there. And if they're serving well, if they're taught to be customer focused and they serve the customers, they can become what I call brand ambassadors. And the ambassadors drive the business forward. But I call it a secret sales force because a lot of the time they are not used or underused or not recognized. And it is about sales through service, but by focusing 100% on the customer, which needs an ethos of a company often to change culture and make sure that anyone who is serving the customer. Well, a phrase I got from Jan Carlson, who came up with the phrase "moments of truth" a long time ago, was that everyone's job is to support the customer, or serve the customer, and if you're not serving the customer, you should be serving somebody who is. And that's what I mean by the secret sales force. So management, other teams, all should be serving whoever is on the front line at the time. That could be a back office worker. If they're talking to a customer, they're front line at that moment, then they need to be supported by anybody who's not serving the customer.
I remember when I introduced this concept to the people who worked with me in my legal nurse consulting business, I would talk about who are our internal customers and who are our external customers. And they said, no, Pat, the only customers we have are the attorneys. I said, yes, but what about the expert witnesses who work as independent contractors for us and are generating income for us? They are also our customers.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
then as a result of that, how does that influence the way that we interact with those individuals? So it created a bit of a mind shift.
Yes.
And as we focus on customers, if we are working within that framework, what would that customer-focused company look like?
In many ways, it would be turning some organisations upside down, in as much as it's more not top down but bottom up. A phrase I've looked at recently is talking about servant leadership. So the leaders are there to support the teams, not delegate and rule them, but to support them. I love using Scandinavian Airlines and Jan Carlson as an example. He turned that company around in under a year by making sure all employees were empowered, regardless of what management rules were. If the customer was there and needed something doing, the employee was empowered and encouraged to be empowered to do what was right for the customer. So what it looks like is that everybody is focusing, customer focus, and know that they're empowered. Because I think when you know you're empowered and you have autonomy to do things, you have more pride in your work. And if you don't have that pride or motivation, then you'll at best be just giving an okay service, which is a lot different from being a brilliant service.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about a man who is a well-known National Speakers Association member, and he was injured in a farming accident when he was a young father and ended up with a injury that left him as a quadriplegic. He was sitting on an airplane and, was put into the seat, was lifted into the seat at the beginning of the flight. And at the end of the flight, no one was coming to take him off of the plane and get his wheelchair ready for him. And they couldn't take off for the next flight and turn the plane around until he was removed. And the pilot and a male flight attendant were staring at him saying, well, the rules are that we have to wait for somebody to bring your wheelchair and we don't know where that person is. And he looked at them and said, I am your customer right now. You have arms. You have the capability of getting me into my wheelchair. Let's do it. Well, it's not our job. Let's do it. And they suddenly listened to the logic of what he was saying, and they got his wheelchair and transferred him out of the seat into the wheelchair, and off he went.
Yeah.
In that moment, it reminds me of what you just said. What can you do with this pilot and the flight attendant didn't feel empowered to solve that problem until he said to them, this is what you need to do.
Actually, that highlights two things. I think that speaker was actually at our PSA summit this weekend, just gone. Gosh, what's his name again? He got a bale of hay came down on him, wasn't it? Yeah. He talked. He didn't mention that particular story as it happened. But so yeah, so that was the one thing. The other that comes from that is, yes, it is about ambassadors. I call it ambassadors, neutrals, and saboteurs, because I think in every organisation there are also saboteurs. Who are totally demotivated, not interested, just want the paycheck, always moaning, undermining, things like that. But it's the neutrals that are the bad ones, because the neutrals can be the lower level of neutrals, where they're almost saboteurs, or the higher level, and they can be engaged and solid performers. But Jim Collins says in his book From Good to Great that good is the enemy of great. And we don't remember good 2 years later, 3 years later, or when contracts come up for renewal, because we expect good. We do remember those emotional experiences, people that go above and beyond, that make us feel good emotionally, or those who make us feel bad emotionally. Those are the ones we remember. So yes. Yeah, I mean, that's an appalling situation, and that's what I would call those almost saboteurs, the neutrals. I tend to think you have neutrals in the lower half and the upper half, and they would be that was the lower half version of a neutral to me.
His name is Chad Hymas.
Yes, that's it, Chad. He was there this weekend in London, or no, he was beaming to us in London and beaming online. We did a hybrid event for the first time.
And we've just talked about a customer experience, and for a legal nurse consultant who perhaps has an employee, I think that's easy to understand, is empowering that employee to be able to make decisions within a realm, I think, of what that person can do to problem solve that upset, angry client. How does what we're talking about affect the bottom line or the profitability of our businesses?
Okay. Well, profit can only be, you only can win profit two ways. You either increase revenue or decrease cost. Now, one of the best ways to increase revenue is to retain existing customers. Now, I'm talking about companies that have existing companies. Clearly, for new starts, then it's different. But we all know it's a lot more expensive to go out and find and market to and pay for salespeople to go out to new customers and convince them over time to switch to us. Whereas if we've built the right relationship, if we've been serving them fully so they really appreciate us, they will be looking to renew. In fact, I tend to think of it as three ways. You have net new customers, and in most organisations that may be 10% of a business revenue. You'll be able to have existing services to existing customers, which quite typically could be 50%. It could vary. And you'll be able to sell new services to existing customers, which could be around 40%. So there's a high percentage of working with existing customers. But it also means there's a high percentage at risk of losing existing customers and that revenue if you don't serve them. So it is about retention. And if you retain your customers, your revenue is still coming in without doing any extra looking. There's no extra cost in finding them. So by that virtue, your profits should increase. The bottom line should increase. And yes, there will be people will leave for various reasons, that the life of the product is not in their business anymore. They've passed on, the business has moved a different direction. But on the whole, retention is far better than searching for new customers.
Is there a percentage or a number that would indicate a great retention rate?
I don't have that to hand. It's an interesting thought to try looking it up. I do look at things from Gallup, which tend to relate to the USA market more than the UK, but I don't have that particular statistic. I was given this sort of rough idea by a friend who used to be an executive for a subsidiary or an ancillary of Hewlett Packard, And he used to say about 5% would be typically net new, but estimating a bit more, it could be 10%. And
Hmm.
he said the 90% was the others, and but mainly the existing customers, existing services was the highest. Now that was in a service-based business. In
Hmm.
a product-based business, I don't know, but again, the same sort of principle arises. Just what the percentages are, I just don't know.
We had, when I sold the company, had to calculate this number for the purposes of putting it into the company's prospectus. And we calculated we had about 85 to 90% retention.
Yep.
There were some attorneys who came and brought one case, and it wasn't the nature of their business to do much of this work. So we didn't get repeat business from them. We had a great core of loyal customers who came back with new cases all the time. And it certainly did reduce that churn rate that people talk about, that turnover rate.
Yeah.
It helped with making it easier to bring in the work because we knew what that attorney was looking for. We knew that attorney's preferences. And it made everybody feel more comfortable. Oh, yes. How are you doing? Nice to hear from you again. What do you got for me today?
Yeah.
Or work that would just walk in the door, Steve, which was a beautiful thing. We would call them um, cases that just walked in. We had
Yeah.
no idea they were coming, but there they were. And
Absolutely.
the attorney was looking for help.
It just, while you were speaking, it made me realise something that, and I don't think many companies do this. But if they were to let their employees know on a regular basis just what their retention rate has been and celebrate the retention, because it's the employees that will effectively be responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a thing about the customer experience, and I say I deal with the customer experience, but I only deal with it through the human interaction. I'm not involved in the other processes. But I do believe the human interaction is the greatest impact that customers will remember the emotional experience more than the mechanical or the processes or the websites. Yes, they all come in, but I just focus on the human interaction because one good human contact can overturn a bad experience elsewhere in the system, and equally the opposite.
There was a woman named Dawn who worked for me as an administrative assistant when I was running my company out of my house. And she had the best phone manner of anyone I have ever had. People would compliment me all the time on how nicely she spoke, how friendly she was. And then she left, and I got a new employee in who was chronically depressed and unhappy.
Yeah.
And instantly, all the compliments stopped. And
Yep.
it was remarkable. It was black and white.
It's amazing the difference. I there's a system called Net Promoter Score, looking at customer experience, and the Net Promoter Score's got it just asks one basic question. It says on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is advocates, 9 and 10s are advocates and give a positive score, 7 and 8s are neutrals and give no score, and 0 to 6 are detractors and give a negative score. How likely are you to recommend this company to others, to your friends, your other companies, etc.? I actually adapt that for the secret Salesforce, and I just use a 1 to 10 scale, and I say that the 1 and 2s are saboteurs, and they're disengaged, actively disengaged. They undermine, they can be manipulative, sarcastic, they're not interested in anything. The 3, 4s and 5s are the employees they'll do what is necessary when it's necessary only. They'll do just what's needed and no more. The 6, 7, 8s are solid performers. They're engaged. The 3, 4 and 5s are only partly engaged. The 6, 7, 8s are engaged. No question, they're solid performers. But like I said, good is the enemy of great, and you don't remember good. We expect good. But the 9 and 10s are the ambassadors, and they go the extra mile. They give in England what we used to call the baker's dozen, and I used to have to explain that for the younger people that when you go to the baker's, my mum would send me to say get 12 bread rolls, and a good baker would throw in the 13th one for good measure. those are the people we remember. Those are the ambassadors. So I use that engagement scale to measure what I think are ambassadors, neutrals, and saboteurs. And if I could just give an example, because neutrals are hard to define, I can easily explain ambassadors and saboteurs. But someone I spoke to the other day mentioned that they were in a supermarket recently, in one of the top end supermarkets, and they couldn't reach stuff at the top shelf. So a young assistant came, got a stool out, and brought two down, which was great, but he didn't go the extra mile and bring the others to the front so other people could then reach them as well. He did just what was necessary for that one customer and no more. That to me is a neutral.
Mm-hmm. I just finished reading last night a biography written by, autobiography, I guess it would be, by Cal Turner, whose family established the Dollar General stores in this country, aimed at low-income people who are on a tight budget.
Yeah.
And he gave the example of his father would go through the store and look at how the merchandise was displayed and said, you know, we need to move this down because a lot of our customers are older and they're not going to be able to reach up that high. And we want these products to sell. So they've got to be within eye level for our customers.
Yeah.
He would look at exactly that question of how is the physical environment in that store set up for the needs of the customers.
And that's where I think you say it's the human interaction, the human touch. Because even with processes, it's if the human thinks about the customer, they'll make the processes better. They'll think about what does the website look like, what is the how good is the telephone answering system. Because these are not the areas I'm focusing on. But if it's well thought out by humans being really engaged and thinking about the customers, focusing on what the customers' wants are, then it will be done.
Before we continue with the show, I'd like to share this special announcement with you. This is about how to manage toxic clients. If you suffer from not knowing how to manage toxic attorney clients, if you dread dealing with angry trial attorneys, then this message is for you. Here's why. When you know how to respond to criticisms, demands, to change your invoices, or unreasonable expectations, you'll be able to comfortably handle the confrontations that might occur. And you need to realize there's a cost to not dealing with this. Without knowing how to handle the situations created by toxic clients, you're anxious, worried, and you dread interactions with certain clients. If you ignore it, it just gets worse. What most LNCs do when facing situations created by toxic clients is attempt to placate them or avoid them. But for most people, none of that works. You might not realize you're attracting the clients you don't want to work with, so the clients keep stirring up trouble. You might not realize your billing practices invite confrontations. You sacrifice your money, your sleep, and your peace of mind. And then what happens if you just do nothing? If you just keep doing what you've been doing, you become disheartened. You question if this field is right for you. You think, I went into nursing to help people, not to be yelled at. You keep thinking, I've got to find a way to satisfy this client. After a number of experiences with toxic clients, as an independent legal nurse consultant, I learned to see the red flag warnings before I got into a nasty situation. Using a 7-step process, I spotted the warning signs, recognized why the attorneys behaved as they did, and discovered how to deal with the toxic behavior. It worked for me, and it will work for you. My system allowed me to feel in control instead of blindsided and helpless. When legal nurse consultants call me to share their own stories of toxic clients, I take them through the process I will reveal to you and arm them with the tools to handle the difficult client. Do you have troublesome clients? Finally, it's your turn when you get how to manage the toxic attorney client today. You'll get the keys to spotting the toxic client before trouble starts. Confidently handle confrontations. Recognize the 7 red flag signals that it's time to fire your troublesome client. It all comes as part of how to manage the toxic client course. Here's what you get. 4 detailed videos in which I take you step by step through the process so you know exactly what to do. Audios of the 4 videos if you prefer to listen. Word-for-word transcripts of the videos so that you can refer to them as a refresher. You get a worksheet for mastering toxic attorney clients with detailed steps and specific actions to take to implement the strategies for effectively dealing with toxic clients. You get 21 ideas blueprint on how to deal with toxic clients so you can effectively manage those clients you can't fire. And you get a checklist for evaluating your fee agreements to plug up holes, and a checklist for the steps in mastering toxic attorney clients. You also get a reference guide for recognizing toxic clients and great clients. It's decision time. You have a choice to make. Do what you've been doing, or worse, do nothing at all. Or you know exactly where that will lead. Is that really where you want to go? Or take a new action to prepare yourself for a toxic client and get a new result. Finally, get the control you want in effectively preventing and managing a toxic client from creating havoc. What do you really want for yourself? Do you want peace of mind, or do you want turmoil? Here's how to order. Go to this link, http://lnc.tips/toxic clients course. After filling in your payment information, you'll receive an email that will take you into the members area of Legal Nurse Business, where you can start accessing the course. If you are already a member of legalnursebusiness.com/members, then use your username and password to access the course. See you on the other side. Now let's return to the show. And I know that our world has changed significantly since 2020. How has that communication that we're describing changed?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think it's been changing anyway for some time. But for instance, Millenniums and Gen Z are using technology in a different way to what we are. And more millennials like my son, who's really not quite, I mean, he's actually a Gen X, but he's got a millennial type approach, both my sons actually. But my oldest son, he won't use laptop. He's got a laptop, he hasn't used it in 2 or 3 years. Everything is done on his mobile. He'll look on it instantly. He'll do everything literally on it. And I think that we have to accept that that's the way a lot of younger people are. They will be so fluent with apps, and yet their communication style, and funny enough, I've just done a training today for public services effectively, and it was on keeping safe, but it has a lot of soft skills talking about it, and they soak it up. I love it working with them because they are so open to the principles. It is all about communication, but many people, I think we have lost that art of communication to some level, and perhaps we need to step back a bit and think, well, it's changed, and that maybe it's changed for the better. But I think the art of communicating directly with people has got a lot worse, and the pandemic certainly has made it harder. Also, if I could add, I think we've been effectively changed for the last 18 months, and yet I still see people online who haven't grasped how to communicate online. Mm-hmm. Which is, after 18 months, you'd think we should be able to do so. You know, they've not learnt the art of how to give their information. Their cameras are not set up right. The sound is often appalling. Little things, where they position themselves. I've had people I can only see from their chin above. But and of course, a lot of people don't put their cameras on because they just don't like to communicate that way. So I think we've lost the art, and to some extent, we've got to pull back some of it. Well, let's circle back
for the final part of this program, we talked about communication. We talked about meeting the expectations of clients and having our staff and ourselves thinking from a customer focused perspective. What do we do when that customer is extremely unhappy?
I think we have to realise that, do you want to win the war or win a battle? Um, Sometimes you know the customer is playing it, playing along, but you have to work out, is it in the scheme of things, are we worried about losing one customer and winning to get back $100, $200? Or are we thinking of a big scheme and, okay, we know they're playing the game, but let's lose that $100 or $200. We're thinking about the goodwill they will give elsewhere. So it's real when a customer is really difficult. We have ways of handling them, and there are ways of managing them. And really, it's about handling those difficult people or awkward conversations. I
Mm-hmm.
use a system where I use an acronym called READ, but if I've got longer, I'd actually go further and call it BREAD, because the B actually, if I use that, if it's a whole day workshop, I'd look at that. I'd be looking at behaviours, how to handle behaviours. Although I don't do too much on emotional intelligence, I do look at transactional analysis and how we use the different states, the parent, adult, child, and how we drift into either a reactive state as a parent or a child, or if we're responding as an adult. So I look at how we control our behaviours regardless of what the other person's doing. You also have to look at triggers, what sets off those traits. And you mentioned that earlier, the triggers. And funny enough, that's what we were talking about today in the course I did today. We always cover triggers. So what is it that sets people off? But the rest of it, the bread, is I look at, it's about rapport. If you've built rapport, you can deal with a lot more smoothly. And so when you don't have rapport, then there's always challenges. And rapport is trying to match as much as possible the values, the mannerisms, the styles, the occurrences of the other person, of the common things. And I always say rapport is people like people who are like themselves. So we want to have the techniques of building rapport. We need to empathise. And empathise is, the way I put it, is it's imagining how I would be responding if I were in their shoes right now, and then responding from that position. It's not about understanding, because we don't understand what we're going through, but we can respond from the position if we were in their shoes. And I also look at assertiveness. It's all about win-win. Being assertive is solution focused. We want the best for everyone, and we're open to admitting we're wrong. And finally, I say it's about being detached, and by that I mean not being attached emotionally to an outcome, but being committed to seeing the best outcome through. So yeah, and there are what I call red rag words and phrases that cause lack of empathy and rapport. And there are phrases that you can use that are very empathic. For instance, don't never saying I understand someone's emotion, but I can appreciate what you're going through. Just a simple change of word can make a difference and keep that empathy. But we can't guarantee that will always work. But what we can do is certainly make it work more often than not.
And I think this is a great formula to keep in mind, particularly in the heat of the moment when the nurse gets a phone call from an angry attorney. The first response can be to get defensive or to start arguing back instead of showing that empathy that you just described in that statement.
Yeah. I'll give another very short technique which we use a lot, and I have to admit I don't know where it came from, but we use it in this training, and in the training I've been doing for a few years. I call it PACER, P-A-C-R, and the P is to pause, stop and think. Don't jump in with both feet. Pause, listen actively, and let them know that you're listening and respond. Acknowledge where they're coming from and empathise with them. Clarify you understand as opposed to assuming you understand. So clarify you understand, and again from that position you then respond. You respond assertively and you don't react. So it's given you time, and it's very powerful when you write an email or you write something on notes, because we often reply in anger. But if we don't hit send but come back to it an hour later and look at it, we've effectively taken that process.
There's much wisdom to not sending that in anger.
Yeah. And the same in speaking too soon. So just that pause to make sure you got it, and acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, how can our listener find out more about you and the services that you offer?
Well, I'm first of all my website, which is simply my name. So it's www.stevecatchick.com. And the way to spell that is with a cat and a chick put together, as my late wife always used to say. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn because my name is fairly unique. When I was young, it was rather embarrassing at times, but now it's such a bonus because people can find me. And I do have a YouTube channel as well. So it's Steve Catchick. And yeah, I'm reasonably active without being overly active on those.
That sounds good, Steve. I like reasonably active without being overactive.
I think that means I should be more active, actually. It means I'm not as active as I always promise myself I'm going to be.
Yes, I understand. Well, you've shared a lot of tips with us, Steve, and I think our listener will be particularly appreciative of the concept of taking a look at the customer focus aspect of our business. Legal nurse consulting is a service business. Attorneys are often functioning under tight deadlines. Yeah. They also have a choice, just like you hear on the airplane when you walk in. We know you have a choice of flying, and we appreciate you flying with us.
Absolutely.
The attorney has the choice of working with a variety of legal nurse consultants to satisfy his or her needs. And it's important that we stay very highly attuned to that customer service focus, to our retention numbers, to the way that we or our staff are interacting with attorneys and what messages we are delivering. Nurses often don't have issues with this except under high pressure because we're trained to respond to people's needs. Oh, Steve, you need something done by Monday? Sure, I can do that for you. That's an instinctive automatic response. But where we get caught off guard is the last part of what we talked about, of that angry attorney who is upset, maybe on an invoice, maybe on the quality of something the LNC has done, and just delivers a blast of annoyance. And that's where we fall down, because we want to please, we want to support, and yet all of a sudden we're being hit.
And that's true. If there was more time, I'd talk more about how to handle that anger effectively, and talk more about assertiveness and what I call the line of emotion. Because I believe if you're staying non-emotional, you're staying assertive, and you can respond that way. Whereas once you go down below that line, you're either getting passive or passive-aggressive, or aggressive because you're reacting. But rapport, I mentioned rapport, and very quickly, if someone is really ranting at us, a lot of people think the best response is to slow it down, be calm and collected. And yet I always ask the same question. If in a marriage or in a partnership, if you're really fuming and your partner is just saying so soft and just saying, yes, yes, dear, or okay, it almost always antagonizes more. So the difference is not to be shouting or angry, but you need to raise that energy. You might need to sit up straighter if you're facing them. Raise the energy in the way you speak so you're nearer to them, and you're pacing and leading them. So you're bringing them down slowly. You're pacing just below them, not at their level, because you will get those cases where people are shouting uptight, and it's very tempting also to just let yourself be either bullied and be passive and not stay assertive and in control without being controlling.
That's great advice. Well, thank you, Steve, for sharing your wisdom. I think we have to bring you back on the show to talk about those techniques, because those are certainly helpful. And I know that our listeners are going to want to know more about how to handle that type of angry confrontation.
Yeah, happy to.
And for you who's been listening to this show, be sure to leave a comment below if you're looking at it on our YouTube channel on legalnursebusiness.com, or if you're listening to it on the audio channels, give a star, give a rating, tell us what you think. Thanks so much. This is Pat Iyer with Legal Nurse Podcast. Michelle Gaines was my guest today, and we talked about her area of expertise, which is the mysterious thing that goes on when the mask goes over the patient's face and the gas gets turned on and the nurse anesthesia experience begins. Michelle, what were some of the key points that we covered in this episode?
Well, Pat, we had a lovely conversation today visiting about who is at the head of the bed. We talked about CRNAs, Certified Registered Nurse Anesthetist here in the United States, and what their role is, along with the anesthesiologist. And then we brought up the anesthesia assistant and how the names of who is at the head of the bed is an evolving, dynamic thing, and who those people are.
All right. And if you have questions, dear listener, as you're working on cases and you see initials of people, you see names of providers, Michelle's podcast helps to explain some of those layers, whether that person is a physician, a nurse, or an anesthesia assistant. There could be 3 different levels of people involved in providing care and sometimes overlapping in their responsibilities. Michelle pulls that apart for you in this podcast, so be sure to catch Michelle Gaines' podcast on who's at the head of the stretcher. Thanks so much.